Welcome to the Art of Breeding with Brian Reeder.
So, Brian, there's a lot of people out there who are getting interested in breeding chickens, maintaining chickens, and improving their strains. It's a movement that's taking off, and there's more and more people getting interested. But I'd like to know what you think about that and what you would suggest they do in their journey.
Well, first and foremost, I think one of the absolute most important things is that they do something they're passionate about. I've seen a lot of people burn out on chickens because they were doing something someone else told them they should do or that this was the right thing to do, and it's not something they had the passion for. So, whatever that is that they find is the thing, whether it's a breed or a color variety or preservation of rare or historic breeds, whether it is preservation of old type land races, whether it is making new varieties, making new breeds, whether it's something very conservative or whether it's something very creative and kind of crazy and often left field. If that's the passion, don't let anyone deter you from that passion, because there's always going to be a lot of chicken people out there that are going to be happy to tell you you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z. You should do this. You should do what I'm doing. You should do it the way I'm doing it. And that's not always what's right for that individual. And so the very first thing I would tell them is figure out what drew you to chickens? What makes you passionate? What stimulated you? What gave you all the feels? What gave you tingles up your spine before you got on Facebook and got in a group and they told you, well, those are mutts. Or they told you, well, you have to breed it this way, or yours aren't good enough, before when you just loved those birds you'd ordered from that catalog before someone downgraded them for you on a chat room and told you they weren't good enough and now you feel bad about them. What was your passion when there was no influence coming from the outside? What do you love? And then what do you do? And it may not be breeding. Not everyone needs to be a chicken breeder. If all else fails, you can just get more chickens from Tractor Supply or a catalog. You can go order them from a hatchery. So if you don't have the passion to breed, don't don't do it. Just keep some hens and rooster, have chickens as pets. One thing I would say, if you are going to breed, figure out how you are going to be able to call. That is so important because you can't keep them all, and chickens are artificial constructs. Our breeds are not real. They don't exist in the wild. We have to work to maintain breeds. So whether you're working with a historic breed or an exhibition breed or a game breed or an egg production breed or a fancy colored egg breed, land races, whether you're making a new variety, making a new breed, whatever you're doing, you have to maintain that through selection. And it's not a good idea to produce birds that are subpar, whether that means lesser health, lesser production, lesser feather quality, lesser type, whatever it is. Inferior birds don't need to be sold off and go out into the world to other people to continue perpetuating inferior birds, because we have to work to maintain the quality of our breeds and lines and strains. They're artificial. So, maybe if you can't call birds, and let's say what it is, maybe if you can't kill a chicken, you don't eat chicken, you're a vegetarian, but you want to keep chickens for whatever reason, or whatever this is, they're just your pets. If you breed from them, either be willing to keep everything you raise yourself and don't breed from it if at all possible. I'm not saying that if a hen sets and you want to raise 6 chicks, that's a bad thing, but don't be actively breeding from subpar birds and selling them. You can breed from some subpar birds and improve them as a breeder. That's what we all do at times, especially when we're getting into this. But don't be perpetuating subpar birds and passing those on to other people as if that's representative. There's plenty of that already going on. So if you can't cull birds, Please have someone you can give them to that can. You can sell them to people who want chicken meat. If you can't do that, pass them on to someone who wants pets. But if you can't pass them on to someone else, um, you can't stand the thought of anyone else having them, then you need to be prepared to keep them if you're going to breed them. Okay. And that is such an important thing. Breeding requires the elimination, in whatever way you do it, of some of what you produce, even if it's just the fact that you can't keep 15 roosters in, a 10 by 12 coop. You know, there's just certain, if you're going to produce more, you need to have some idea of how you're going to let go of excess birds, and try not to. And most people say, oh, I can sell the excess. Well, you probably can't sell excess roosters. I mean, because there's a glut on the market for those. So you probably can't sell them to begin with. And then just because you're satisfied with them doesn't mean, if they're subpar, they don't match the standard. Maybe they don't have the greatest health, because a lot of chickens don't. Maybe there's some kind of problems there. Don't be selling those. The best possible thing you can do if you want to breed is also be someone who likes to eat chicken.
Yes.
And yes, if you want to breed chickens, then you get a cookbook on poultry recipes.
There's plenty of them out there.
There's some good ones. And chicken's delicious. I love chicken.
And homegrown chickens are the best.
Is the best, the absolute best, because you're giving them better feed. You know what you're putting into them. And if you can't kill them and dress them out, find someone that can. Someone who will do it for you. Find a family member. Find a neighbor. There's someone you can share some with them. Whatever it takes, figure out how to do this. But if you're going to invest into breeding, you need to know how to do this, and you need to know how to do it right and responsibly. I'm not talking about willy-nilly massacre. I'm talking about conscientiously and humanely disposing of excess birds that don't need to go anywhere else. So this is something I would really, really strongly stress. Then, if you can cull chickens, you can also breed chickens. But if you can't cull chickens, please just keep some pets, keep a few egg birds, replenish your flock from someone who is a breeder who can cull. Go ahead.
Let's back up just a little bit and
Sure.
talk a little bit about you, Brian, and what has been your journey in the past probably 30 years now, and
Yeah.
where you have come from, because from what I know of you, you are a wealth of knowledge
Oh, well,
when
thank
it
you.
comes to
Yeah.
breeding, genetics, color combinations, the whole
Yeah.
9 yards. So let's talk a little bit about you and where your journey had begun.
Okay, great. Well, I grew up on a farm in Kentucky with people who were subsistence farmers. And both of my grandfathers kept chickens, and my grandmother on my mother's side kept chickens. And I grew up with chickens. I've loved them as long as I can remember. I've kept them. I kept chickens as a child. I made my own crested cochins as a child. I was always interested in breeding plants and animals. Throughout my teen years, I bred plants and animals. As an adult, starting in my late teens, early 20s, I began research projects with chickens. In time, that grew into actual scientific research, into immunogenetics. And because I was doing the immunogenetic work and I was crossing different breeds and I was always interested in color, that gave me the opportunity to study the genes of color and pattern while I was doing the immunogenetic work, because I just kept more records. And I would set up crosses. So I was crossing two resistant birds, or a resistant and non-resistant bird, to a given pathogen. But I would also set it up so I could answer specific questions about colors and patterns and issues of phenotype, feather type, and body form, skeletal muscular genes, because I was curious how all these different forms emerged. And so I did that up into my late 30s. It was 2008. when I finally stopped with the research. And at that point, I went into a daylily breeding program. I had always kept daylilies, and I'd always wanted to breed them, but never had time because of the chicken work. And so from 2008 to present, I have been developing a daylily breeding program. And for me, whether I'm breeding plants or animals, it's all kind of the same. I wrote a book, Color Forms, Introduction to Color Forms of the Domestic Fowl in 2006. And then in 2011, I followed that up with an Introduction to Form and Feathering of the Domestic Fowl. And starting in the summer, in June of 2025, I began a YouTube channel. I'd gotten on Facebook to promote my dailies in 2015. And so that meant I began interacting with chicken people again, not because I wanted to, but because they were hunting me down. And so I was getting pulled back into the chicken world peripherally. And so once Kenny and I began making videos for his Breeders Academy website and group, I started kind of thinking about my legacy and thinking about, well, there's a lot of people who have now read my books, and I could do more with that. And the technology had finally gotten to the point that even a technological illiterate like me could use it and do this. I now had access to the images, because when I was doing all that research, digital cameras were so bad. They were nothing. I didn't take pictures of most of this stuff. So I didn't have the photographic record to create something like this, and suddenly it's all sort of come together within 2025 that I started putting this together. And so in June, I launched The Art of Breeding with Brian Reeder, and that is to get this information out to people in a more digestible form that is available in a visual way, because my books are text, and I wrote them that way on purpose, because I wanted people to read them and not just look at pretty pictures.
Yes.
I wanted them to be information that is absorbed. But now that they've been out for, almost 20 years on the color book, it's been 19 years. I felt like it's time to really add this secondary layer to them. And so beginning in December of 2025, I will start doing videos that cover every subject in both of the books, and they will probably run for a year or more. And then the other thing that I have consistently continued to do is to do consultations. And the reason I continue to do consultations is because I enjoy doing one-on-one work with other people. And when they have an issue or a problem with their breeding program, I like to be able to help them out with that. And one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to do this video was because I wanted to talk about the fact that I have my own tastes in what I like in poultry. I have my own ways of approaching a breeding program. I view the genetics really from an almost human genetic perspective, because a lot of the researchers that I worked with were human geneticists, and they were using poultry as sample groups, as there's a word for that and I'm completely blanking out on it, but as basically as sample organisms that you would study. There's a word for it specifically. But they were human researchers, and so they taught me to think in terms of population genetics. And so I think about poultry and poultry breeding differently than most poultry breeders will. I personally am not that concerned with breeds or preservation, because I see them as artificial constructs that are temporary. And even if you say you're preserving a breed, in 100 years it's not going to be the same because of genetic drift and taste, different tastes and selection of the generations of breeders. Just like the birds we have now that are going by the same name don't look the same as they looked in 1870, or
Exactly.
for those few things that have actually existed much longer, because most of our modern breeds are no more than 150 years old as we know them. But when you
Yeah.
have things like white-faced black Spanish or Dorkings or Old English game that do go back for centuries, when you see plates of what those looked like or artwork of what those looked like 500, 1,000 years ago, they don't look like they look now. They
No, they
look
don't.
kind of similar, and like maybe you can recognize that something's a dorking from a 750-year-old textile because it's got a fifth toe, but it just looks like an old English game of some kind with a fifth toe. Because back in those old days, dorkings and old English game were kind of pretty much the same thing, except one was boxier with 5 toes and one was bigger, but they crossed back and forth all the time. There was no, they weren't being cooped up and kept apart from each other. And so these, like all early land races, they were distinguished by a few characteristics, while other characteristics were variable. So I view this in a very different way than most poultry breeders are going to view this. Most poultry breeders see breeds as real things, and they're wanting to preserve and or improve breeds. And one of the things that I really want to stress to people is that I'm always going to be presenting my way of viewing this to people because I want to sort of shake up the way they think. Breeds really aren't real, or we wouldn't have to work so hard to maintain them. No one's working that hard to maintain blue India peafowl, because nature set those and they work that way. But if you let your chicken breed go unselected, breeding as they choose for 10, 15, 20 generations, they're not going to look like what you started with.
Yeah.
Even if they're recognizable as like a land racy version of maybe that breed, things will have changed. Things will have gone awry. So I do want to shake people out of complacent thinking, and I want to get people to think in a broader way and in a more creative way, because I think that can help the long-term preservation of chickens. That's what I'm more concerned with than the long-term preservation of a specific line or breed, because that's just a temporary combination of specific genes in one package. So my personal concern is the long-term preservation of chickens through things like selection for disease resistance, production, fertility, viability, these things that are more important to the long-term survival of an organism. However, I completely support people if they want to do preservation, if they want to maintain show stock, if they want to breed to a standard. I'm not against any of that. Me saying to someone, well, breeds aren't real, doesn't mean that they're not still, that we have them. They're temporarily real. They're real right now. They're real to you if you believe in them and you're breeding them. You've got a standard. You're shaping something to look like that standard. It's that thing. It may not look like that thing in 150 years, but you can keep it looking like that as long as you keep selecting that way. And so if that's what someone wants to do, that's what I want them to do. And so it's important for me to stress to people that my goal in doing all of this is to give people the information that they can do what they want to do so they can pursue their passion. Because I believe more people, the more poultry people who are pursuing what makes them passionate and keeps them in chickens, the more poultry people are going to keep doing it. Over the 40, 50 years that I've been associated with chickens in one way or another, one of the things I've seen is people get into it, and they're doing something someone else wants them to do, or what they're told by the show group that they have to do, or what they're told by this group that they have to do, or they're breeding something that they don't really like, but they think this is the thing that's hot at the moment, so it'll sell the best. But they don't have a passion in it and they don't stick with it. The people that I know who stick with it maybe get no recognition. They're not selling anything, but they love what they're working with. They love it. So like for me, there aren't any breeds that appeal to me very much because, I have moved to a point that's so far out in left field that there are specific traits I like, but there are pretty much no breeds with all those traits together. So for me, if I were going to keep chickens, I would have to take different things and put it together and make something that I could stand to look at every day when I have to go trudging out in the freezing snow and the blazing heat and deal with these things, pooping in their water and, uh, making a mess and
There's a certain
roosters
amount of
hitting me.
commitment. Yeah.
There is. And you have to be passionate to carry that out. So, for me, there's just most breeds that has something I don't like. I don't like single combs for a reason, not because I don't think they're pretty, but because I hate the way they freeze in the winter. It's the same reason I don't like evergreen daylilies. They get damaged in the winter, and so then you have a damaged, ugly thing to look at, and I don't like that. I prefer cushion combs with pea comb and rose combs being secondary. Of course, a cushion comb is just pea comb and rose comb. One of the pushes for me toward learning about all of these genes and how to put them together was that by the time I was 25 or so, I knew I didn't like any of the breeds. I'd kept lots of them. And then by the time I was 30, I had kept thousands of all kinds of breeds. And there was almost nothing that I could come back to and say, I love that. Now, there would be instances where I could come back and say, I love the temperament on this Cochin and Brahma, say, for instance. I love the temperament. I love the frame, love the bone structure, hate the combs, hate the feather legs, hate the low egg production. They're a little bit too big for my taste, but that's not that big a deal. My absolute favorite phenotype is the Yokohama, but Yokohamas are an inbred mess that are unsalvageable. They were brought into this country through such a small number of birds and then have been so inbred and have deleterious genes to begin with that there's no genetic variation there to do anything with them. Chanticleers are cushion combed, and I like them. They're okay, but they come in white and partridge. And that's, that would bore me to death in about 2 generations. There are specific color patterns I like. So none of these things that I like are all together on one bird. And I knew this quite early on. And so studying the genetics gives me the tools to go in and just structure what I want when I decide to start breeding chickens again. Or, at any point. And that's what I was doing. And I would still probably be doing that if a mink hadn't wiped me out in 2012. Although now I look back on those chickens, and even though I was right at the verge of having some breeds out of that resistance breeding and gene research, I look back on them now and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Because, they had a lot of Cochin and Brahma in them, so they were heavily feather-legged, and I just hate leg feathering. And there's a reason. It's not because it's not pretty. It's gorgeous. I think it's beautiful. But because as they age, where the feather comes out from under the scales on the legs, not only does that allow leg mites, but it also causes deformation of the leg. And so birds with that kind of leg feathering often will become lame by the time they're just a few years old. And I like longevity in birds. I have birds that are going to live 15, 18, 20 years. And I have had a few Cochins make it to 20 years or more, but they were messes by the time they did, as far as like their leg scaling and stuff. And then the other thing I don't like is that they're constantly dragging those big leg feathers through chicken shit. And so it's aesthetically unpleasing. So anything that I don't like, I have a reason for it. It may not be reasonable to someone else, but it is completely thought out to me. There's nothing arbitrary. I have never looked at a chicken and I just thought, that's ugly, I hate it. I like them all in the right setting, and the right setting is almost always someone else's hen house. So
I get you. I get you with that. But I just want to say real quick that we have both of Brian's books, and they're very easy read books. And I know there are a lot of people out there that they hear the word genetics and they go, forget it.
They get discouraged very easy because it just seems daunting.
Yeah, I don't like science. Forget it. But I'm telling you, anybody who is watching this video right now, go out and buy his 2 books because they are an easy read. He simplifies everything for you in those books. And there's every trait, every gene, every color gene, he tells you why it's there, and what it is. And it'll really help you because it's not so much in the game fowl world, but in the domestic world, there are so many different, feather patterns and so many different colors that, have to be meshed together to get the right thing for those that are showing chickens who have to follow the standard of perfections because their hobby is to
That's
show
right.
birds.
That's
I
right.
just
Yeah.
think that if you're gonna fall in love with the birds, it makes it easier if you fall in love with the process as well, and accept,
Absolutely.
because it's a commitment, like I said earlier, and
Mhm.
you got to be willing to do what it takes to raise them,
Yeah.
take care of them, feed them. It's
Yeah.
not something you just do once in a while. And then if you want
Mhm.
to perpetuate them, you got to make your decision on whether you're just going to perpetuate birds or you're going to actually perpetuate
And
a special,
improve.
yeah, and
Yeah.
improve the birds,
Yeah.
And there's some soul searching, but like Brian said, I mean, he went kind of hiatus for a little while, and I encouraged him to come out and
Yeah.
get back into the game. I'm so glad you did, because you're
Mhm.
changing, the world.
Oh,
You're
well, thank you.
changing the trend. You're changing the way we do
Mhm.
things. You're making people think, and that's a big thing to me, is not only get people into the hobby, but they're going to be influenced by so many different people, and I want them to think a certain way. And if I can get them to think a certain way, then I'm going to get them to breed the birds in a certain way. And it's going to
Exactly.
improve the breed, preserve the breed. And Brian, you're helping me do that, and I really
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you, and thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. And that was the goal, and especially the color book, even more than the form book. Now, I think the form book is the better of the two, though no one else thinks that. But that's because I wrote it second, and so it was a more streamlined process. But the first book, the color book, is laid out in a specific way that it details the three bases, because every chicken variety will have those three bases. And then everything else in terms of color and pattern are additive genes on one or the other versions of those three bases. So I created it in such a way that it creates a system whereby you build up from the foundation to the framing to the window dressing. You do the whole thing up to the final details. So that is created to make the genes understandable, if you will learn and really internalize that it's those three bases that lie at the heart of the whole thing. Every chicken color variety is going to be made up of a specific combination of those three bases, which is the E allele, the S allele, and either the presence or absence of autosomal pheomelanin. And then everything else is just gravy. It's just all additive genes on top of that. That's the meal. That's the base. That's the foundation of the house. The other thing I did is I grouped all the varieties as I described the varieties and how they are made, the gene combinations that make the varieties. Each of those fall under the E allele family. So there's all the varieties on duckwing, E plus, all the varieties on EB brown, all the varieties on EWH Wheaton, all the varieties on ER Birchin, all the varieties on E extended black. And I didn't use non-standard varieties. So they are all only the exhibition varieties that were standard at that time. There are a few now that I didn't include because they weren't standard at that time. Things like ermine and black copper, neither of those are in there because they weren't standard. But you can figure out what certainly black copper is. Ermine is a thing on its own. But I stuck with the exhibition varieties, but I also gave people all the tools they need to make varieties. If they start thinking about, okay, here's all the exhibition varieties as of 2006 that are on duckwing, but here's the three bases. So we've got duckwing and we've got whichever version of the S allele and presence or absence of autosomal pheomelanin. What else could we put on that no one's ever done? So the doorway is also there. It's written both for the exhibition community, specifically and directly to the exhibition community, but all the information's there for the creative artists who want to go further, for those who want to push the envelope and do something, out of the box. So it's written in such a way that it's of use both ways, and that's the thing is I want I'm not going to do exhibition. If I ever keep chickens again, it's not something I'm interested in. I like all the breeds well enough when you keep them. I love them. I think they're beautiful. I don't want to keep any of them. If I ever do chickens again, I'll make my own thing because they basically need to look like a Yokohama that'll live. That's basically what I want. And it's bigger and it's more productive and that, comes in a lot more color varieties based on a couple of the eel families. I particularly like duckwing and brown. And granted, the current varieties of Yokohama are on duckwing, but it's so obscure you wouldn't know it. The standard varieties of Yokohama are red-shouldered, which is a highly complex combination on duckwing that unfortunately the white areas are made up from the progressive whitening syndrome. So that right there just ruins them. And then the other is recessive white on top of basically that. And so they both have the progressive whitening. People in the US made a silver duckwing version, and some of the catalogs carry them, and they're marginally better. And if I were ever going to attempt to use some Yokohama blood, basically to get the long tail and saddle with the yellow skin and the red earlobe and the cushion comb so that I don't have to combine all of that, I would go to those silver duckwings. Cackle Hatchery still carries them. But I would know I would need to get a bunch, and I probably wouldn't be able to keep very many, and I would still have to battle progressive whitening because they have it too. Because even though those were started in maybe 1989 or 84 or 79, something like that, pretty early on, they started making. John Bayliss made the original cross that those silver duckwing Yokohamas came out of. All these decades later, they still got progressive whitening because no one's bred it out. It can be bred out, but no one's done it. And so that's a real uphill battle. And so I would almost be like, let's just get some Chanticleer and Phoenix and get to work from there, That I don't know how I got off on that dirt road. But basically, you can take these books, and I know what it was. I would want to do a couple of different families. So I would recreate this if I were going to breed. And all the tools to do that are there in that book. But if you only want to breed Millefleur Ducle, the information's there. The formula is there. If you only want to breed exhibition partridge rocks, the formula is there. If you want to create something a little broader where you're breeding partridge and you're breeding laced and you're breeding maybe a spangled all on brown, the information is there. And if you look at it, those are all EB Brown families. Those are all variants on the EB Brown family group. So I kind of wanted to congeal information so that people could use it in any way they wanted to approach it, because that's what I want to encourage. I don't have one specific thing that I want people to do other than maybe select for disease resistance and maybe select for vigor and fertility, and to not reproduce sickly, difficult to breed birds that have no production, that produce 6 eggs a year and things like that. But beyond that, as far as phenotype, it doesn't matter to me. And when people come to me for consultation, I just take what they need and I give them the information that they need to do that without any judgment or any proselytizing. I'm not trying to convert them to anything. I just want to help those who come to me for consultation to do what they want to do and to improve what they're working on. So that's kind of an important thing too.
Yeah, that's how I handle it too. It's not that I'm trying to instill my values and my principles and practices to them exactly, as I want to help them get where they want to go. And I think that's what you do too.
Thank you for visiting my channel. I hope this video was interesting to you. If you would like to know more about this subject, leave a comment or question below in the comments section. Please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell notification to be alerted when new videos post. You can find my poultry books on Amazon at the link below in the show notes. My daylily website, sundragondaylilies.com, offers information on booking me for consultations on your specific genetics questions or mentoring for your breeding projects. It also lists all of my daylily introductions, the cultivars that are currently available, and links to my blog where you can find the bulk of my daylily writing. Thank you for joining me for this video, and I hope you'll be back for more. Have a great day.